Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's class, Parsha in My Life. This week, Parshas Korach. Okay, we're not going to dwell on Parshas Korach today. We're going to do something else. Bear with me on this one. Okay, so this week, Thursday, is Gimel Tamuz. And it's celebrated across the entire world as a very, very meaningful day. In 1994, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, what would look like and what would appear like, the Rebbe just passed away. Okay, and therefore it's a day that is considered a yard site by many. People all flock to the Rebbe's resting place in Queens, and that's. Then there are many other people who feel the day is different, and that the day has a much deeper significance, and that the day is part of a process of redemption. So it's pretty a confusing day. It's a confusing day in Chabad. It's a confusing day. It's a very powerful day. It's a day of one thing everybody agrees upon. The different ways of relating to the day is that people all feel that it's a day of heightening our bond with the Rebbe, the Rebbe's holy soul, the Rebbe's physical presence, and so on and so forth. It's a deep connection. It's a day of it's a powerful day. So regarding the subject matter of tonight's class, I am really not that comfortable giving this class because I saw some things today which got me very excited and intrigued, and I'd like to share. But because it's such a sensitive topic, I did not, that if I am going to share, I want it to be like solid, and I did not get a chance to process. Which means because I'm busy with some other classes and things that I'm working on, and I didn't get a chance to like digest and to really make this mine. Some of it is coming directly from the Rebbe's sources and from teachings the Rebbe said. Some of it is from someone who sent me a pamphlet, which I happened to open, and it's a fellow who writes extensively on Mashiach. And when I read it, I thought, wow, this is really interesting take. Some of his thoughts, how he's connecting to this, and I felt it was worthy of sharing, but I didn't process it enough. So my relationship to my take on this class is that it might just be up on YouTube while I'm giving the class. If I don't like it, I'll take it off. So grab the class. For those that are listening right now, this is what you'll get. For those that I might delete at the end, not because of the concepts. I just feel they're a little raw and they're not yet ready. It's not fully cooked. So it's going to be delivered a little bit and you never know, it might come out really good, but I don't know. So I'm just kind of like just playing with certain ideas. The reason I opened up the way I opened up with is because I do feel that it is a sensitive subject which people are uncomfortable with. Because of course there are the camp that says, you know what, just take it for what it is. The Rebbe passed away like everyone else. He tried to bring Mashiach. It didn't happen. Stop being a fanatic. Stop being a lunatic. Be a regular person. Accept it as it is. Go on with your life. Still continue believing in Mashiach. And whatever is going to happen is going to happen. Okay? Those of you who study with me, all my classes that I teach, especially the Key to Redemption that we've been given. By the way, it's my favorite class. We're holding already an episode number 9. It's mind-blowing information. I think when we listen to those classes, then you realize that things cannot be as simple as some people want to make it be. And so what I'm really saying is, I've gone through this myself together with thousands of Hasidim. At the time in 1994, when our hopes were crushed on this day, it was a very difficult day. And there's a certain part of me that kind of was, okay, you know what, you go on, you move forward, and that's what it is, and you try to figure out. But as much as I tried to live with that reality for a certain amount of time, there is something much deeper than me that just never accepted that. And for many years, I kind of just wished it away, and it didn't deal with it to really explore the subject on a deeper level. A couple of years ago, as many of you who followed Mayan Yisrael from the beginning, you can see there was a progression. My enthusiasm and excitement about the topic of Mashiach has grown and grown and grown, which forced me as well to, go full throttle on this particular topic. What's Gimel Tamuz? What did the Rebbe say? What was his own teachings? What did the Rebbe say regarding his own association with Mashiach? It's not a hidden secret that there is a messianic fervor in Chabad. And it's not a hidden secret, like I gave a class the same time of the year last year, where I told you that the Rebbe was the one who fanned the flames of this. It's not like some people try to make it that there were a few radical Hasidim who try to push it on the Rebbe. That's not true. And if you learn the talks, including the talk that we're holding a middle right now, I did already 2 classes on it. You can listen to the sources. And we're going to do class number 3, but over there we're learning how the Rebbe says that the third temple is going to manifest and come down in 770 Eastern Parkway. So the words of the Rebbe. That's where redemption is going to begin. Because the Rebbe explains how we went through the whole thing, how the Mashiach comes from the lowest part of the world, not from the highest part. So New York, which is in the United States, which on the other side of the world where the Torah was not given, when we start elevating the world from the bottom up, and that's where Geula is going to start. That amongst other hundreds and hundreds of different teachings and thoughts and things the Rebbe said explicitly about himself, about that this generation and the leader of the generation, which is the 7th generation, is the ones who complete the job, and that our generation is the last generation of the exile and the first generation of the redemption, which means the same leader that's the end of the exile is the leader of the generation. And tons and tons and tons of other things, including the fact that Hasidim sang to the Rebbe for an entire year, and it started even before the Rebbe's stroke, in which they sang, "Long live our master, our king, Mashiach," and the Rebbe encouraged it in front of the entire world, again and again and again and again. So this is not something that could be dismissed lightly. There are those who have very, very, and I know it's a raw subject, and a lot of people have very, very passionate opinions this way and that way. And again, I've been through it. And when it comes every time, this time of the year, it forces me to analyze and to go deeper. So all I can do today, what I would like to do, is share with you some things the Rebbe himself said regarding the day of Gimel Tamuz. And I found a talk, not I found it, this is this fellow. I printed out his booklet over here. He has it in English as well, with sources. I checked some of the sources, and I need to, whatever. I can't say I agree with everything that's written over here, just because some of the things I'm questioning, basically how he derives them. But I liked a lot of what was said, so I'm going to, what I'm trying to say is I'm not taking credit for this class. There is someone, a fellow in Israel. We'll see if we'll say his name later, depending on how the class comes out. Had some, I thought, brilliant ideas, and I'm going to be gnashing from that. But what he did is he opened up to me a talk that I didn't know existed, that the Rebbe spoke about in 1985. So in 1985, 9 years before the Gimel Tamuz that we know, the Rebbe gave a talk on Gimel Tamuz. The Rebbe also gave a talk on Gimel Tamuz many times. I will soon see why. In 1991, which was the last time he spoke on this day. And he, in both these talks, in 1985 and in 1991, the Rebbe shoots an arrow right at Gimel Tamuz, and he hits it bullseye. He hits it right in the middle, meaning to say it's impossible to say that this is random. Here you have a leader who's leading, is the world leader. He's leading thousands and thousands of people who would adhere to his every word. and look at him for spiritual guidance. And we know that he is a man who is divinely inspired. He has Ruach HaKodesh. He speaks, as we mentioned, and when he gave the talk that I'm teaching now, the talk that on the 28th of Sivan that I'm calling on the online, it's called Key to Redemption, but the title that I titled is called Bottoms Up. In that particular talk, the Rebbe clearly states that regarding his own talk, that when he is talking, he uses the words, it is connected, it's kosher, it's bound up, it says verbunden, it's bound up with God speaking. In other words, the Rebbe is basically saying there's someone putting the words in my mouth. I'm not speaking because I'm speaking. These are holy words. So we realize that if the Rebbe stands on Gimel Tamuz and he tells us the significance of the day, that he probably knows the future. He knows what's going to happen in 3 years, Gimel Tamuz, and he knows how confused we're going to be. So he wants to help us out with our confusion, and he gives us a little bit guidance so that we should have the right mindset when this day comes. So let me tell you what's going to be at the end. No, why should I tell you that? I'm not going to tell you that. Let the Rebbe do the talking for me. So in the talk of now, so let's go back for a moment. Why did Gimel Tammuz? Why is the Rebbe giving a talk on Gimel Tammuz? Well, he gives a talk so many times of the year. Well, it was Shabbos, so the Rebbe would give a farbrengen every Shabbos. He would sit with the Hasidim and talk for hours. But Gimel Tammuz has significance on the Chabad calendar. Why does it have significance on the Chabad calendar? Because in 1927, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Rebbe's father-in-law, and anybody knows anything about the Rebbe and his father-in-law knows that the Rebbe and his father-in-law were bound up in an unimaginable, unfathomable bond. The love and the bond and the connection was just on levels that are incomprehensible. As anybody, to the Rebbe, his father-in-law was alive after his father-in-law passed away, and his father-in-law was his guide. The Rebbe even didn't see himself as the Rebbe. The Rebbe saw his father-in-law as the Rebbe all the years. And the Rebbe would always say, I'm going to ask my father-in-law. After his father-in-law passed away, he would go to the OL and communicate with his father-in-law. So during the lifetime of the Rebbe's father-in-law, the previous Rebbe, the Rebbe and his father-in-law were bound up like in an unimaginable bond. So on 1927, the previous Rebbe was arrested in Russia, and he was cast into a very, very severe prison, which was danger to be there even for a minute. The Friediger Rebbe was in that prison for over 2 weeks. He was arrested on the 15th day of Sivan. He spent somewhat over 2 weeks till Gimel Tammuz. So it's from the 15th of Sivan to Gimel Tammuz is 2 weeks plus 2-3 days. I'm not exactly 17 days, 18 days. I'm not exactly sure the number. And then on the 3rd day of Tammuz, he was released from prison. Now, earlier, during his time in his prison cell, he was condemned to death. They initially, God forbid, were going to literally take the life of the previous Rebbe, or at least they thought they have the power to do so. He was the ultimate enemy of the state. Then what happened was they were forced, they changed it, they commuted it to a 10-year sentence in Siberian labor camp. And then they commuted that again within 2 weeks. It's almost like someone was twisting their hand from above. And in the end, they sent the previous Rebbe to exile. The day they sent him out of the prison was on the 3rd day of Tamuz. Okay? Now he went, but he was forced to go to an exile somewhere out in the Russian outback in a place called Kostroma. And over there he had to spend 3 years where he would be cut off primarily from much communication with the Hasidim. But it was still a situation where his life was just saved. Because every moment that he was in prison, God forbid, the prison was a place where people were literally, there was no regard for life in the prison. At least in exile, he's free, he can move around the town, he has to register and he can't leave. And of course, there were certain restrictions on him. They probably would check his mail. I'm not exactly sure what the restrictions were. So that would make it difficult for him to be able to run the operation. Turns out he arrives in Kostroma. He's there for a week or whatever, 9 days or whatever. I don't know how long it took him to get there, so I'm not exactly sure for how long he was there. And then they come in with the news and they free him completely. And that's on the 12th day of Tamuz. And he's given the official release papers on the 13th day of Tamuz. And that day becomes a very great celebration in Chabad. Because not only was the Rebbe's life spared, but the Rebbe was able to leave Russia. And then from there, continue to lead the Hasidim. Again, we're talking about the 6th Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak. And then eventually come to America and lay the foundation for world Jewry from the United States of America. So this is a holiday. And it was completely miraculous. Because if we would only know how much the Russians celebrated his arrest, the communists, and how much they hated him, and how much they saw him as the one who was undermining their entire apparatus to erase God from all of the USSR, we can understand that the fact that they let him out, okay, there was international pressure, but Raoul Wallenberg was also international pressure, and no one knew what happened to him. The Russians, take a look at Putin now. He does what he wants. World pressure don't mean too much with him. So they weren't any better, the Soviets. So it's clearly a miracle. It was divine intervention, and therefore we celebrate it. So here, watch this. Comes the Rebbe, and the Rebbe is speaking about, therefore, the Rebbe would talk Gimel Tamuz. Because Gimel Tamuz, unlike, remember, let's go back to the 3rd day of Tamuz. Gimel Tamuz is the 3rd day of Tamuz. The completion of the release was on the 12th day of Tamuz. So between the 3rd day and the 12th day, right, there's a week. So the Rebbe addresses the 3rd day of Tamuz. And he says exactly these words. The 3rd day of Tamuz is a confusing day, he says. He says, we don't know what to make out of this day. Now we know, he says. But when it happened the first time, people were confused and they didn't know. What was the question? Hear what the Rebbe says. I'm literally telling you what he said. He says, when it happened that they took the Frierdiker Rebbe out of prison and they sent him, the Hasidim didn't know if they should celebrate. What was their dilemma? They didn't know if this is the beginning of exile or this is the beginning of redemption. Why? Because on the one hand, he was going, on the one hand, his sentence was lightened because he's out of jail. He's out of the prison. So the fact that he's free to go, in that sense, it's like it's a liberation. But on the other hand, he's being sent to exile. So therefore, there was a confusion regarding the day. The Rebbe goes so far to say that the confusion was so deep. The Rebbe says that it seems like even in heaven there was a confusion. This is like a wild statement the Rebbe makes. You can look up that talk. Even in heaven, why? Because it seems like even in heaven it wasn't sure what was going to happen next. Why? What's the Rebbe's proof? I mean, the Rebbe can tell you what's going on in heaven, but he's not going to tell you that because I know. He says, because my father-in-law, when he stood on the platform and he was saying goodbye to the Hasidim, when he was being sent off to the faraway town, to the exile, he stood over there and he spoke about how the Gentile nations need to know that when the Jew is in exile, only our bodies are in exile and not our soul. And therefore, they have absolutely no power over our soul. And when it comes to matters of strengthening Judaism and Torah and mitzvot, they need to know that they should bug off. Because we don't have to listen to them. And we're going to do whatever we want to do. And actually, the previous Rebbe, can you imagine? They're sending him away because of the crimes of his spreading of Judaism, which he claimed was not a crime, but they claimed it was a crime. And as he went there, he sent and the worst thing the Russians were after was they didn't want the education of the young generation. They didn't care if the old folks are going to keep religious. They didn't want they wanted that Judaism should fizzle out, that the young generation should be sworn communist atheists. So the one thing they couldn't stand, and this was the main war of the previous Rebbe, was that he sent his Hasidim to open up underground schools for children and teach them Torah. Now, when the Frierdiker Rebbe was sent there, the first thing he did was he dispatched the Chassid to go in front of him to start a cheder in that town, to start a school for children. When the Frierdiker Rebbe went there, he initiated a building of a mikvah in the town. So he was going there immediately, disregarding and he was going to do whatever he can to spread Judaism in the town that he was coming to, even though this was the place of the exile that was sending him. And the first thing you would say to a person is, don't mess. At least don't mess on the first day. At least don't mess when you're standing on the platform. But the Rebbe says, from the fact that the Frierdiker Rebbe spoke as if he's going to exile, and he did not speak in any celebratory a tone, as a tone of a celebration. He spoke with fierce like a lion. However, he was speaking about a looming darkness, is a sign that, and the previous Rebbe is a Rebbe, so he knows what's happening in heaven. So it's a sign that the darkness wasn't only down here on earth, but it was also in heaven. But then the Rebbe said a week later, when the previous Rebbe finally arrived at his destination, and he arrived before the week, but a week later when they came on the 12th and 13th of Tamuz, and they released him completely from his prison, from the exile, and he was free to go. So then retrospectively or retroactively, it revealed that what we worried was the beginning of exile was really the beginning of redemption. So let that sink in for a moment. The Rebbe is talking about this day, Gimel Tamuz, which is going to be the day most uncomfortable to every Chabad Chassid. Uncomfortable. Definitely a day of discomfort. A matter of contention, a matter of not knowing what, where, and when. If we say the Rebbe just passed away and left the job to bring Mashiach and to complete the job for someone else, that's pretty much the beginning of an exile. Because if anybody realizes where the Rebbe took us, with such excitement, with such momentum to the threshold of the redemption, he had us all believing that it was going to happen any second. I was there during that time in 1991, 1992. I was a teenager or just about that age. And I was excited, and everybody, we were like, the whole Chabad was on steroids with the Mashiach. So it's definitely a regression and a terrible heartbreak if you will argue that it's just a regular yahrzeit. The Rebbe passed on and fartik. And like some people will say, we didn't merit. So the Rebbe says, there is a certain element of Gimel Tamuz that looks that way. And it's a day that we won't know till much later what the day really was. However, later, it took a while later to be able to go back to the day and realize that what happened that day was not the beginning of a darkness, but the beginning of a redemption. Now, one will argue and will say, the Rebbe was talking about the Gimel Tamuz that was before his Gimel Tamuz. What are you being so naive? The Rebbe is talking about the Gimel Tamuz that's going to come in 3 years from now. Again, he spoke that twice, the Rebbe says, in 1991 and in 1985. And he said it more times. I'm probably. I know specifically of 2 times where he's discussing the day, and he says we didn't. Oh, I know it's 3 times. It's also in Likutei Sichos, volume 4, from a talk of 1958. Where over there again, the Rebbe is talking about the day, and he defines it exactly like this. In the beginning, it wasn't known. Retroactively, it became known that it was the beginning of a redemption. So again, someone might argue and say, well, the Rebbe is talking about a day that was. He's not talking about his own Gimel Tamuz. So first of all, obviously, one can make that argument, but it's a very poor argument, because anybody that knows anything about tzaddikim understand that he wouldn't be giving you a definition on a day, and this day would become such a crucial day in his own life, such a crucial, important day in his own life, and whatever he said doesn't apply to his own. You don't need more than that. I mean, we don't even have to almost refute that argument, but I will refute the argument by quoting the Rebbe himself. So we move forward in this very talk. Oops, get other glasses to help me read small letters. Oh, here we go. Let me read you the word. After we saw what happened in the literal, when the Rebbe came out from his punishment of what would be the punishment of exile, till he was able to leave the country completely. The end proves from the beginning was the beginning of redemption. I want to, just before I continue, the Rebbe himself goes on to explain, not only for future years. In other words, we'll say like this: in 1927, the day was really a dark day. But in 1928, by the first anniversary of the day, since we know what happened a few days later, now it has become a Yom Tov. Gimel Tamuz is actually a day to celebrate, not a day to mourn. The Rebbe says, no, you're reading it wrong. When he was revealed, when he was redeemed on the 12th and 13th day of Tamuz, a week later, it retroactively changed the nature and the character of the day in 1927, the first time that it happened. And the Rebbe is insisting on it, that day was, it just maybe it wasn't clear to us, and there was a certain darkness in heaven, but on a deeper core essential place that maybe only God knows, at the deepest inner place, it was a day of redemption. It wasn't a day of concealment. It wasn't a day of exile. It was a day of redemption. But okay, now let's continue a little further. Over here in chapter 8, the Rebbe continues as follows. He says, now you should note that the third day of Tammuz has an ancient history, as a special day. In other words, in addition to 1927, there is an earlier event that happened on this day, the Rebbe says. What happened 3,000 years earlier? What's the event? Everybody knows that when Yeshua led the Jewish people into Israel, it was accompanied by some really cool miracles. The splitting of the river that happened. The walls of Jericho, of Yericho came tumbling down. The powerful, huge stones fell from heaven, killing the armies of the enemies. Well, one of the amazing stunts that happened was that Joshua prayed. No, he didn't pray. He called out to the sun and the moon and stopped the sun from setting. Basically, it's a pasuk over here in Yehoshua, chapter 10, Joshua 10, Yeshua Yud, verse number 12. Oz Yedaber Yeshua Lashem, B'yoim Teis Hashem es Amori L'fnei B'nei Yisrael, when God gave the Amorites into the hands of Israel. V'yomer le'enei Yisrael, and he said in front of everybody, Shemesh b'givoin doim, the sun should stand still at Gibon. V'yoreach, and the moon be'emek ayolan. Basically what happened was that that Yeshua stopped the celestial orbits. Why? Simply it was because, like the verse says in the next, Vayidam Hashemesh, the sun stopped, halted, Vayareach Amad, and the moon stopped. Ad yukam goy oiva v'lo yuksuv al, until a nation can take revenge of its enemies. What happened was they needed more time. The battle was going good. There was momentum on the side of the Jewish people. The enemy was falling like flies. They just needed more time to finish. In order to finish the military operation that was needed to be done that day, nighttime would have hindered the success. So in order that it shouldn't become night, he decided he stopped the sun in the sky, and basically we had a very long day. And when the campaign was over, and all of these guys they managed to kill all their enemies, he allowed it to continue. So this was one of the most spectacular miracles. What's the date of when this happened? Was on the third day of Tamuz. So the Rebbe says as follows: Mekivon shekol ha'inyanim. Read these words. Since all things are b'hashgacha pratis, by divine providence, and it's understood. Shekasha matzinu beizmu urois, when we find two happenings, sheiru ba'oisa hayom, that happened on the same day, hamadas mahalach hashemesh al yedei Yeshua stopping the sun, which is redemption, because it's part of conquering the land of Israel. It is an act that furthered the redemption. And the beginning of the redemption of my father-in-law, which both of them happened, Gimel Tamuz, both of them happened on the same day. He should say it's possible to say. He's not talking weak like me. I'm coming over here and I'm saying, maybe, could be, don't get offended if I'm saying this. The Rebbe is not talking like me. The Rebbe is talking truth as it is. He says, we have to say, there is a connection between them. And he goes on to explain how Joshua stopping the sun and the previous Rebbe coming out of the Rosh is exactly the same miracle. He's going to explain. But the first thing what the Rebbe is saying is that when you have two events happening on the same day, please connect the dots. In that very same talk, he's telling you that there is a day called Gimel Tamuz. It's a day which initially looks very dark and bleak. And it doesn't just say dark and bleak. It looks like the beginning of an exile. But that's because you haven't gotten the end of the story. When the end of the story will happen, it redefines the day, and not only do you realize that what you thought happened didn't happen, but actually what happened was the exact opposite. What happened was the beginning of a redemption, not an exile. So this right away makes us flip our entire perspective on the day. And we realize that there's stuff deeper than what the eye meets the eye. And that the fact that the Rebbe told to us quite a few times about the day that would be the most confusing to his Hasidim and to the Jewish world, Jewry at large, and to the humanity as a whole, we realize that just lighting a candle, learning Mishnayos, and showing up to a Gimel Tamuz thing and saying it's a special yard site and the Rebbe is a big tzaddik and Chusay Yagan Aleinu, let his merit upon all of us, is not the real story. It might seem so. It's interesting that in the Rebbe wrote a book, his first publication. It was the Hayom Yom. The Hayom Yom, a little Hasidic teachings for every day of the year. A daily thought, if you can call it. On the day of Gimel Tamuz, when the Rebbe wrote this in the 1940s. He doesn't write, he's not writing his own thoughts. He's collecting from his father-in-law's teachings. And he's clipping little clips. And obviously, we know that he didn't just randomly need it to fill every day. Every day, the clip that he clipped was related to that day. So on Gimel Tamuz, what's the Rebbe's clip? What's his teaching? He speaks about a Jewish sigh. How a Jewish sigh, how powerful it is, that even if it's regarding a physical darkness, that means if when a person sighs and they're sighing because of a spiritual dilemma, then of course their sigh constitutes repentance. The Rebbe says, even if you're sighing because you have an ingrown toenail, or you're sighing because your dinner, got spoiled, you forgot the chicken in the oven and it got burnt, or whatever it is, and you let out a sigh, because you're more than just a physical being, you also have a soul. And to a certain degree, the soul is also participating in that sigh. So what's really going on is when you're sighing, you're really sighing and you're doing repentance. And he says it's not just a small repentance, it's a very high repentance. So from here I see that the Rebbe is not dismissing the sigh that is on Gimel Tamuz. The Rebbe knew that this is going to be a day that people are going to sigh. Until Mashiach is visibly here, it's going to be a day that's going to sigh. So those people who run around and don't let anybody sigh, anybody give a krechts on Gimel Tamuz because they say Mashiach is here and boom, 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 and don't even acknowledge it and don't that, I think are absolutely wrong. Because the Rebbe himself says, I understand that people are sighing. I can see the darkness. There is a darkness. It's a confusing day. And for whatever reason, a person could be in one mindset and not able to free themselves from that mindset, and therefore they see only the physicality of it. That's what the Rebbe is talking about. When a physical problem, because what really, really, really is happening is, and everybody in Chabad, and anybody who, when I say in Chabad, I don't mean only in Chabad, anybody in the world who follows Chabad and knows what's going on in Lubavitch will know and can tell you that even if we say, according to those who believe that the Rebbe just passed away like any other tzaddik that passed away in the past, right? Even they will agree that the Rebbe is active now in the world in an unbelievable way, because his Hasidim are inspired by him and are driven by him. And not only that, they communicate with him. How in the world do they communicate? Through thousands and thousands of miracles. It's clearly that in all of Chabad, everybody believes. In other words, even those that take the messianic aspect out of it and look at it and see the Rebbe as the leader, and meanwhile, and they'll say there's no replacement. So who is the leader? The Rebbe continues to be the leader. And that's why thousands and thousands of people will go to Queens, to the resting place in Queens, and they're going to ask for blessings. There's going to be literally a pilgrimage happens every year. It's beautiful. And thousands of people are going and they're connecting, and other people are, because people, no matter where you stand in this difficult moment, everybody realizes that spiritually the Rebbe is alive. The question is only, there is on the physical level, there's a darkness. Some people will say the darkness means just regular passing away like anybody else. Others will say that by the Rebbe it has to be different. It's a concealment. It's a concealment. What does it mean, concealment? I don't know. But not the ordinary passing. But what's most important is that if you learn the Rebbe's teachings and the Torah that the Rebbe says, you realize the Rebbe said that we are already at the time of the redemption, and that the redemption process has begun. And now in this particular talk that I'm showing you, the Rebbe is pointing out that what seems to be a day of exile is really retroactively defined as the beginning of redemption. So how do we make sense of that? But what would be the possible explanation that the Gimel Tamuz itself could be not concealment, but be a stage in the redemptive process? The Rebbe says it openly, but what could be the explanation? So what's interesting is that when you read the Rebbe's explanation of what happened on that day, and you look at both these events, again, there's 3 events on Gimel Tammuz that we are discussing. The first event that happened with Joshua stopping Yeshua, stopping the sun. The second event that happened in 1927, the previous Rebbe is liberated, but he's sent to exile. He goes out of prison, but he's going to exile. But the exile is only one stop over before he's liberated completely, before it becomes a full-fledged Yom Tov, a full-fledged revelation. So if we take these 2 stories and let's see if we can find a parallel in the Gimel Tammuz that we know, the last Gimel Tammuz, the Gimel Tammuz of 1994, which to the naked eye seems to be a regular passing. Maybe there's a deeper story here, and maybe the story, the writing is on the wall. Maybe we were told before what the content is. So let's begin with he makes a certain point. Again, this is not from the Rebbe anymore. This is from this fellow that I'm quoting over here. He makes a certain comparison between what happened to the previous Rebbe on Gimel Tammuz and what happened to our Rebbe. At first I loved it. After that I question it. It's still good, so I'm going to share it, but I'm going to show you where I have a problem with it. And so I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure that particular analysis is a good analysis. But I still feel it's worth sharing, and maybe someone listening and will have perhaps maybe it will be clarified in the course of discussion. I'm just putting it out there. Again, and this is very, very maybe. Okay? So what happens to the previous Rebbe? He's in prison. He's released from prison, and where does he go? He goes to exile. And the Rebbe has a whole discussion, as I mentioned in the talk. Is that an improvement? It's interesting. In the talk of 1985, the Rebbe has a discussion, a whole question: is leaving prison and going to exile an improvement? On the simple level, it's a big improvement. Because in prison, you have no autonomousness. You have no freedom. You can't do anything. The jail wardens are completely in charge of you. And you're bottled up in a tiny cell. So that's a horrible place. Going to exile, you have far more space and you have far more freedom to move about. You're still constricted. You're not with your friends and family. You're sent away, and it's very hard. The Rebbe even brings what it says in the Midrash or the Gemara, that exile is compared to death. So it's not a simple thing, but it's still improvement over prison. But the Rebbe actually says that yes, but maybe not yes. Why? For 2 reasons. Reason number 1: as long as he was in prison, his fate had not been sealed yet. In other words, when someone is still in prison, this is before they This is jail. I think it's called jail before prison. Prison is when you're actually already doing time for a crime. Jail is where they hold you until you're court caped, until what is decided. So he's saying when the previous time, you don't know what the outcome is going to be. So you can still hope that it'll be liberated completely. But once someone has been given already a sentence, they've been sentenced, it's much harder to change it because the sentence has been sentenced already. So in that sense, being sent to exile, in a sense, you're more stuck. Even though the current conditions are worse, but you have a chance any moment that whatever they will decide will be freed completely. But once you're sentenced, you're sentenced. That's one reason. The second reason is very interesting. The Rebbe looks at everything according to Torah. The Rebbe says, in Torah, we don't find a punishment in Torah. We find the Torah relating stories of people being sent to prison, but we don't find a punishment of Torah prison. The Torah does not sanction the punishment of prison as one of the punishments given to people. There is lashes, there are monetary fines, sometimes there is even capital punishment. But prison, in halacha, there's no such a thing. You get sent to prison. Now the Rebbe does make note that the Torah gives what's it called again? A power to the courts to sometimes invent a new punishment that is not. In other words, if the court decides that this person is a danger to society and therefore they have to lock him up, they're allowed to. But there is still no official punishment called prison in Torah. But exile is a punishment. If someone kills someone by accident, there is a punishment of exile. So exile is a punishment. Therefore, the Rebbe is questioning, and he's saying it's possible that coming out of prison and going to exile is actually worse, because in Torah you're going into one of the punishments that Torah sees as a punishment. Prison is not a Torah; it's not a Torah phenomenon. It's a very interesting way of looking at it, and therefore it could be worse. Fine. Now, I'm sorry, I didn't prepare this class, so I'm all over the place. So bear with me. I might be putting together something. I didn't prepare it well. The Rebbe later, by the way, asks in one of his talks, he asks the question: why didn't the previous Rebbe, who instituted that we should celebrate every year his liberation, he was the one who asked that we should turn it into a yontiv. Why didn't he make the yontiv on the third day of Tamuz? Why didn't the Friediger Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, institute? Because that's the day that his life was saved. And we understand that coming out of prison to exile, in that talk he says, is huge. So why didn't he make it into a yontiv? The Rebbe gives a very interesting answer, which also can be applied over here. Watch this. He says when the previous Rebbe came out of prison, to him personally, it was a great yontiv. Why was it a great yontiv? Because his life was saved. So on a personal level, his life was saved. It was a great yontiv. But because the previous Rebbe is a leader, he's a shepherd, and his flock is the dearest thing to his heart, and his flock is still suffering because their shepherd is not with them. So being that even though he himself is in a good place, but to his flock, the situation did not improve in terms of his relationship with them, he's still cut off from them. Therefore, he's still in terrible pain, and he doesn't want to create that day to be a yontiv. He doesn't want to make that day a yontif. Why? Because his flock is not together with him. But let's continue. But the Rebbe says, that's the Friediger Rebbe's business. That's the way, because he cares about us, he didn't make it. But we need to care about him. From our end, the Rebbe says we need to care. So by us, Gimel Tamuz has to be a big yontif. So number one, you see that who is the one, let's analyze this. Number one, you see who's the one who created Gimel Tamuz to be a yontif. Again, the 12th of Tamuz was a yontif by the previous year. It's the Rebbe's own yontif. The Rebbe is the one who declared the day as a yontif. So which, sorry to say, knucklehead, is going to say that the very day that the Rebbe made into a yontif, the day that the Rebbe made into a yontif is the day that ends up to be the day that everything, God forbid, the whole dream of redemption tanks, and that doesn't make any sense at all. That's just an interesting observation that came to me while I'm teaching right now. Because the Rebbe said, we have to make it into a yontif. Now another thing, however, you do see over here. What does the Rebbe say about the Gimel Tamuz? Why would be the argument for it not to be a yontif? Didn't we just discuss that there are clashing opinions about this day? Is it just a yahrzeit and a heavy day, or is it a day of redemption? We might not understand exactly the process, but it's really a Mashiach day, an unbelievable Mashiach day. We were talking about this possibility, yontif or not yontif, right? Well, the Rebbe says the reason it shouldn't be a yontif is because the Rebbe is separated from the Hasidim, at least in a visible way. The previous Rebbe was still a tzaddik, and he can still think, and being in exile, he still remembered all of his Hasidim, and he would still pray on their behalf. And even if they can't always reach him with a letter, he knows their problems without them reaching him, because a tzaddik knows intrinsically all the souls that are plugged in with him. So on the spiritual level, everything is good. But why was the Frierdiker Rebbe not make it into a yontif, not make it into a holiday? Why? Because his Hasidim feel disconnected in the sense that they can't reach him, which also tells us a lot. That Gimel Tamuz has a bitter taste to it. The Gimel Tamuz of 1994, I'm talking, our Gimel Tamuz. Because after everything is said and done, our Rebbe, our master, our teacher is physically not as accessible as he was before. And the inspiration that comes from being able to walk into the Rebbe's room or to pass by dollars and receive a blessing directly, not having to take it from the books and the inspiration and do it mentally and emotionally and know you're getting an answer, and like we all have, but there's still a separation. So you see how many things are so aligned. It's so aligned. Oh. What we see from this particular talk of the Rebbe is when the previous Rebbe was sent into exile, he is still barred. Even though he's in a better place physically, but he's barred. And in a sense, for him, it's a celebration. He's liberated. He came out of jail and he's liberated, but it's still considered an exile. Why? What's his main problem over here? Is his lack of communication with his flock. So this fellow that I was reading his article today came with this interesting idea. And he said, on Gimel Tamuz, to whatever degree we will take that, and I know people have very, very strong opinions about this, but to a certain degree, the Rebbe's existence becomes less physical, at least to the naked eye, which means the soul, on the physical level, again, if those who want to insist, the Rebbe's soul left the body. So he argues and he makes this argument. He says, well, that's coming out of a prison. Why is that a prison? So he brings what the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, that the body is considered a prison. For a soul, that's a piece of God from above, a body is considered a physical body is a constriction. Not only that, but he brings a letter in his he brings it from I didn't look up this letter, where the previous Rebbe is talking about him sitting in a cell, a prison cell. And he's talking about the suffering that he had when he's sitting in a prison cell. And he says how difficult and how hard it is to be in a prison cell. And he says, and I am then deducing from this how difficult it is for a soul to sit in a body. So the previous Rebbe himself is comparing his prison to the entrapment of the soul in a body. When the soul leaves the body, it's actually a liberation for the soul. Therefore, he wants to say, now I have a lot to say on this because I'm not going to leave it at this. There's a reason I'm giving so much precaution to this. So he says, in that sense, what happened on Gimel Tamuz is literally the same thing that's happening to the previous Rebbe. Is that what? The Rebbe's neshama is leaving the body. Because he's leaving the body, it's a personal redemption, going out of the constrictions of physicality. And therefore, but why is it exile? Because just like we say that when the Rebbe was in exile, he couldn't communicate with the Hasidim, or to the visible communication. The same is after Gimel Tamuz, it's not the same level of communication. When in other words, there is a quality in the prison over the exile, in this sense. Because the prison at least gives the Rebbe a physical presence to the fact that we can therefore communicate. And as a result of that, we can have interactions. He can interact with the Hasidim more, and with the people that seek his counsel and his advice, he can interact on a much greater degree. However, when he goes as a couple of notches above the body, although we know that from that more remote, distant place, he's very much present and operating and giving blessings and taking care and on top of every situation, but it's not that visible. And therefore, he can't, it's an exile because he's less communicative from that place. There is a limitation in the communication. But he doesn't leave it just like, where did he go? So he in his talk is not shying away from being pretty intense. He brings sources. And I'll read to you over here the Or HaChama, which is the Pirush on the Zohar by one of the great students of the Ari. Or HaChama, this is a book by Mordechai Azulai. He's from the early Kabbalists, from the students of the Ari. He talks about how Mashiach, this is what he says about Mashiach. Hear these words. He says Mashiach, there's a passage in the Zohar where the Zohar says that the day of the redemption, Mashiach is going to come down from Gan Eden. Mashiach is going to come down from the Garden of Eden. So he asks the question, that means that Mashiach is some heavenly being coming from the sky. We know that's not that way. He says, according to that, Mashiach is then not born from a man and a woman. He's not a human being. This is in, by the way, in Or HaChama Shmos, Daf Ches, Amid Daled. How can that be? So this is the Arizal's. He brings it from Rachav, from Reb Chaim Vital, which means this is Reb Chaim Vital, I think, quoting the Ari. Again, I think so. If he brings from Reb Chaim Vital, the Ari is a very, very. Reb Chaim Vital is also a very serious authority. It appears to me, Mashiach is going to be definitely a tzaddik, being born by a man and a woman. And he will grow in his righteousness until the end of days. No, Mashiach will be a human being. He will be a right tzaddik. And he's going to merit to develop his neshama on the highest levels. He will merit the high levels of soul. When it comes to the end day, the time for Mashiach to arrive, we know that not the whole soul is enclosed in the body. Only part of the soul is enclosed in the body. The higher soul is still in heaven. So the higher part of Mashiach's neshama is going to reveal itself in the body. That part of Mashiach's neshama is where the real power of the Redeemer comes from. That's what it means. It's going to leave Gan Eden. Doesn't mean that he's going to come down and just maybe pop out of the sky as a human being. He's already alive in this world, but a much higher spiritual capacity will reveal itself on him. Suddenly he'll be imbued with the Spirit of God. Where do we find something like that? By King Saul. King Saul, when the moment he was anointed, the verses describe he became a different person. He suddenly was exalted. He had energies that he never had before. He became a complete different person. King David as well, David HaMelech, when he was anointed with the oil, suddenly it's like a much deeper spiritual capacity and flow is downloaded into him. So this is what he describes over here. So that's the meaning. He will come out of Gan Eden. It will be given to that tzaddik. And then he will merit to be the Redeemer. And this is similar to Moses. Moshe was a tzaddik in this world. He himself didn't know he's a Redeemer. One day Hashem communicated with him and the higher power descended into him and he was the Redeemer. Fine. Okay. But what he says, but watch this. Okay, this is I would say old news. But he says when this will happen to him, then he will recognize himself that he's Mashiach. Once he gets that higher download, he knows who he is. But which till now he himself didn't know. He wasn't sure. Now he knows for certain who he is. And then he reveals himself, which means he will do certain things to speak and to. It's not he's going to keep it a secret. He is going to communicate the fact who he is because he knows who he is intrinsically. But here, this point, even though he will reveal himself, the rest of the people won't know him. In other words, he won't be universally accepted. His powerful light as someone who will be undeniably a force in creation, no. But the question he says is, if he has this powerful soul, if he has such a powerful soul, then his light should light up the whole world. How can it be that he possesses that soul? He's already conscious of it, but it's not visible to the whole world. So he says, don't wonder if this soul is still covered because it has a fog around it. Because it has a pillar of fog on it. Because so happened to Rebbe Lazar, he brings a sage of the Zohar, which was also incorporated with a powerful infusion of higher energy, but it was surrounded with a cloud, which means it was blocked to others. Okay. So listen to these words. And so to this Mashiach, after he merits that soul, and he recognizes himself that he's Mashiach. And that's what it means, Mashiach will be revealed. Doesn't mean to the whole world. It means to himself, and he will reveal it to others. It says earlier, Yizgala. But he won't be perceived by the whole world that way. Wait. Others will not recognize it. This is where I wanted to get to. After that revelation, Mashiach will be hidden with his body and his soul. So the Arizal talks about Mashiach after his soul has revealed itself to him. After he revealed it already, but others don't recognize him, his body and his soul will be revealed, will be concealed. Be'ahu amuda, in the pillar. Like it says by Moshe, that Moshe came into a fog, into a cloud. And then they will take him up to the heavens. Just like Moshe went up to the heavens to prepare for 40 days and 40 nights, right? He went up to the heavens. Mashiach will go up. And afterwards, he's going to come back down as a human down. If it doesn't have to be reborn. because it's just a temporary elevation of him, body and soul. V'az Gala Mashiach legamri, he will be completely revealed, Yakiruhu Kol Yisrael, and everybody will recognize him. Yiskap, they will gather to him. Very interesting Arizal. Rambam Halacha, it's a different discussion. At least we should know that this exists. Whether you want to apply it to the Rebbe or not, you do it whatever you want. I'm just showing you what it says over here. It's talking about a human being that is a tzaddik, that we can all agree. That is someone who spoke about himself as Mashiach. If you learn the talks, you know that. We talk about not everybody recognizing, you know that as well. And then, and the question is, afterwards, a situation where body and soul. But what this rabbi is suggesting, that as great as it is to go out and hang out in Gan Eden, like the previous Rebbe is going to Kostroma, it might be wonderful for him because he's going there that they download in his soul and they prepare him with the highest wisdom and the highest revelation, and who knows what he's receiving up there. But for him, it's a massive exile. Why? Because he knows how dark it is for us. And that's where the Rebbe says what happened to his father-in-law in Gimel Tamuz. Oh, so the question is, just like the father-in-law, when he was sent to exile, was it meant to be 3 years? Or did it turn out a week later that he was coming back? It was just a little station. So the Rebbe says it turned out to be later, that it was part of the redemption was he had to go there, and from there he went there. In other words, it's not the final destination. It's like in the thing, you put in the maps, you put in various different stops. Sometimes they used to say, maybe they stopped saying, I think, because it didn't sound good. You reach your final destination. No one wants to know where the final destination. So no good final destination, but you've reached your destination. So the final destination, it's not the final destination. It was a detour. He went there so that he can be redeemed. He can later be completely free. So the Rebbe is saying about his father-in-law. So he's talking about, we can apply this to Gimel Tamuz. That even this phase that we're talking about over here, don't think it's a permanent situation. Went to Gan Eden. Everybody else goes to Gan Eden to stay in Gan Eden. Number one, he doesn't go higher in Gan Eden. He stays in the lowest Gan Eden, by the way. When you say in Gan Eden, what does Gan Eden mean? The lowest Gan Eden, which is, it's basically on earth. There's a lot of Chassidus, the Tzemach Tzedek and other places where it explains that there's many levels of Gan Eden. There is one Gan Eden that's on earth. But, so why don't we see it? Today, the Tzemach Tzedek asked the question, we've mapped out the entire earth, why don't we see Gan Eden? So he says, because it's ruchni shebegashmi, it's the spiritual of the physical. It's in the physical, it's not pure spirituality. It's the physical world in its most refined state, that it's the spiritual of the physical. And that's where Gan Eden is. And that's why he says you can pass by Gan Eden and you won't see it because you're physical. And you don't have the sensors to be able to feel the Gan Eden. When you say that Mashiach goes to Gan Eden, means he's not run away from the world. We're talking about a state where he's just above the physicality of the eye to be able to see him. Which at this point really explains, this kind of like will make sense to those who are insisting the Rebbe's completely alive. Not the same like others who pass away in a regular way. The Rebbe's passing has to be a passing, because we can understand that I once gave a whole class about this, about Yaakov Avinu not passing away. And there are those who learn that it means in the literal sense, didn't pass away. So here we're talking about physicality going up to a state where it's beyond visibility, but it had to come through being in the hospital, and the doctor signing a certificate and a coffin and a burial and all that. There's no problem. It can all be. But what happens to the body immediately after that? Once they cover up and they do what they do, which angels are there to do that no one else sees? Do you know what happened? Do you know where the supernal angels take this body and where they put it and where he goes? What do we know? Again, we can guess. I don't know. But at least if one wants to argue that this is probably what the Arizal is talking about, We can say Yesh Lomar, there's a lot to base on. Okay. But this is just the beginning of the class. It gets much better than this. Oh, now why don't I like what he says? Let me take you where I take issue with it. I don't like the fact that he's talking about that the body was the imprisonment and they had to leave the body, which is a prison. Because it's true, a body is a prison. But it's hard to say that on a body of a tzaddik on that count. Why do I argue that? The Alter Rebbe says, now I could accept, again, I'm going to give a nod to him and an argument to him. Let's go at both ends of it. I could acknowledge what he's saying in the sense that the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya that even the highest tzaddik, even a person who's a huge tzaddik, who serves God day and night, still the physical body is a constriction. That's what the Alter Rebbe says. Even someone whose body has become so holy and that he's serving God with the highest level of love and fear of pleasure, still because a body can't handle intense spirituality until Mashiach comes, the body can't handle the most intense spirituality. For that reason, the Alter Rebbe says that the love and fear that a tzaddik experiences in the body is not even a tiny little something compared to the soul when it wasn't in the body. That's why the Alter Rebbe proves that it can't be we came down here for spiritual experiences. Because in terms of spiritual experience, it's only a downgrade. The Alter Rebbe says you have to learn from here that we came down into this world to fix the animal soul, to fix the body. Because for the soul, coming into the body is only a downgrade, not an elevation. Through coming into the body, it will later gain. So that kind of gives a proof to say that even at tzaddik, a body is still a body. But on the other hand, why I am arguing that maybe not, why I have a hard time to accept that part of the analogy, because of one reason. There's a fascinating midrash where the midrash discusses when God is talking to when Moshe Rabbeinu is passing away, when Moses is passing away. So everybody's got to learn this midrash. I think it's in the midrash says. So if you want to read it in English, it just is absolutely stunning. It's one of my favorite midrashim. Over there, it discusses how Moshe is fighting with the angel of death. So amazing. He wrestles with the angel of death. God sends the angel of death, and Moshe takes a stick and runs after him. The guy goes running for his life. It's amazing. And the whole dialogue. And the angel says, everybody is given over in my hands. And Moshe says to him, well, I'm not everybody. And he says, what do you think? You're different than everybody? And Moshe pulls out his resume. And he says, did anybody accomplish this? It's amazing midrash, how Moshe. But in the end, the angel of death has no power over Moshe. And God himself comes to take Moshe's soul. But what's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful at the conclusion of this midrashic experience is even though initially God is talking to Moshe, but there's a certain point where the conversation changes and God starts talking to the soul of Moshe. Not to Moshe as a human, he's just addressing Moshe's soul. And God suddenly talks to him in the feminine terms and he says, my daughter, it's time to exit. And the soul says, I love it here, I don't want to go. And God says to the soul, well, I gave you 120 years over there, now it's time to come back. And the soul says, well, I'm not planning on leaving because I really love it over here. So God says to Moshe's soul, I'm going to put you under the throne of glory. I'm going to elevate you to the highest place. And Moshe's soul tells God, I'm not so impressed. I'm happier in Moshe's body than under the throne of glory. I'm more comfortable here. Why? The soul says to God, I know from under your throne of glory, two of the highest angels came down to the world and they became corrupted. That means that the beings who live under your holy are not so holy. Moshe's body, it's delicious over here. This body has not had even the slightest imperfection. I'm very comfortable over here. And you know what God does? He stops arguing. He kisses the soul and pulls her out. There's no discussion because the soul wasn't going. So what do you see from here? That when you're talking about tzaddikim who are the ultimate tzaddikim on the levels of such levels, then their bodies are not a prison. The bodies are already. So that's what I find a little hard for me to connect to, in which he's drawing the parallel between the two events of Gimel Tamuz. The one going out from the body and going to an exile, which means even part of the messianic process is going to Gan Eden. I just find that, and I find that tiny part just objectionable. Objectionable. Okay. However, now let's take it to the next story. What else happened on Gimel Tamuz? So on Gimel Tamuz we said Yeshua stopped the sun. What's its significance? This is really cool. So let's first look at what the Rebbe says is the relationship with Yeshua stopping the sun with the miracle that happened in 1927. The Rebbe says that these two events, remember I shared with you, these two events, since they happen on the same day, are the same content. They're not just related, but they're the same content. How does the Rebbe develop that? And he says like this. When Yeshua stopped the sun, what did Yeshua do? It says he silenced the sun. The words the Torah uses is that he told the sun, shh, silence. The words over here, shemesh begivain doim. So the question is, why is he silencing the sun? Why silent? He should have told him, Amod, stand. So the explanation is given that the movement of the sun in the orbit of the sky, the fact that the sun is racing and moving in enormous speeds, the galaxy of the sun, as it's moving in the sun's rotation, is caused by the soul of the sun. The sun has a body and the sun has a soul. The soul of the sun is causing the body of the sun to move. Just like us, our bodies move. Why? Because our soul is alive and can make our bodies move. The soul also has a spirit, which causes it to move. Why is it moving? Its movement is because the soul of the song is like an angelic being that is singing to God. And the singing part of its song is that it's bowing down. It's singing and bowing to God. That's why it's rising on the east and setting in the west. Its western movement is because the sages tell us that the Shekhinah is on the west. So the sun is back. When the sun is moving, it's bowing and it's singing. So when Yeshua wanted to stop the sun from moving, he needed to get to the source of that movement. The source of the movement is not just a natural phenomenon that the sun is moving, but it's because the soul of the sun is singing. It's the song that's causing the sun to race through the sky. So how does he stop it? By telling the sun, shh, silence. We'll soon see how he did it, but we'll get to that in a moment. But by silencing the sun, he caused the sun to stop singing. It stopped singing, it stopped bowing. Because it sings its bowing. That's kind of how it does. It sings to its bowing. Like when we bow on Yom Kippur, we all have a special song that we do as we're bowing. One of my favorite songs. It's like a whole cantorial piece. And we go down with the song. So the soul, the sun is racing through the sky. It's singing. So Joshua stops the song, so he stops the sun. That's why it says Dain. Fine. So now, the question. Let's take this apart. Take this apart. Few parts. Now I'm going back to the Rebbe's talk in 1985. The Rebbe explains all these pieces. The Rebbe first asks the question: In order to help the Jewish people at that time, let me just think if he asked the question over there. I'm not sure he asks this question over there. Okay, but there's a question definitely asked. To mess with the supernal constellations, basically, you're really, really tinkering with the entire cosmic order. I mean, I imagine that when you move one peg, a lot of other pegs are moving along with it, right? Because things are. You imagine that there's it's like moving one dial on a clock. You're moving a bunch of different things. So Yeshua is basically messing with the entire cosmic order, right? Which is interesting because, and why? Because he wanted to buy some time. It's probably easier ways to get around that. And the biggest proof is, part of what happened during that time was God was throwing down stones from heaven. God sent out the angels and they were popping stones from above. Literally missiles were coming from the sky. And that actually killed most of the enemy. More than what the Jewish people killed with the sword by having a longer day. How do we know that? It's recorded in the verse. Look what it says a little further. Sorry, let me get over here. I'm going to find you the verse. It says over here in Joshua. Over here, just let me finish over here. Oh, if I find it, I'm not going to spend too much time looking for this. Anyways, there's a verse that says specifically that more people were killed by the stones, by the Avnei al-Gavush, than what the people killed. There was an explicit verse. I just I didn't see it right now. If that's the case, couldn't Yeshua call for, if he needed to kill out more, couldn't he call for a little bit more reserves? Come on, send in, what are you talking about? There's a certain amount of weapons over there. Wherever these stones are coming from heaven, they probably have a sufficient supply. So you have to go mess the entire system up and stop the sun and stop the whole situation in order to extend the thing. The reason Yeshua stopped the sun was for a much deeper reason. What was the reason? It was the Jewish people against the nations at that time. The nations were all pagans. They were idolaters, serving idols. Part of the serving of idolatry was serving the heavenly celestial beings. The idols that were made down here represented the gods in heaven, which they associated as gods, the sun, the moon, and the various different constellations. Now, here's an interesting thing. Were these people total idiots? That they believed that they made these gods and they thought that these gods have power? We can say these were not too brilliant people. They weren't too smart. But the Rambam Maimonides explains that they were not such silly people. Actually, they were very knowledgeable. And in many ways, they knew much more than people know today. Not in the physical sciences, but in the metaphysical, they had huge knowledge. The ancient Egyptians, they had huge knowledge. What did they know? They knew they were able, because through certain spiritual powers, they were able to tap into the flow of energy that is flowing through the cosmos. And God sends all his blessings to the world, all of his sustenance to the world. Hashem sends it through the sun and the moon and the constellations. They act as conduits through which the blessing comes. What the nations what the mistake that they made, Rambam says, the mistake of idolatry is to believe that these conduits have their independent power. Instead of realizing that it's God working through them, they gave these constellations or these forces somewhat of an independent importance, a chashivas, an importance on its own. And that's why they bowed down to them. Now, being that the flow of energy does come through the sun and does come through the constellations, and how does it come? Let's go back. How is the sun receiving its sustenance from God? The sun is providing the earth simply. It's supplying the world with warmth, with heat, with light. And the sun is responsible for everything that grows in this world. It's all the whatever they call it, photons and stuff like that have to do with how's the sun receiving that. The sun can only pass on this divine bountiful blessing to receive all this energy from higher when the sun is singing its song. In other words, by the sun surrendering and singing and bowing to God, it's through that singing and through that song that the sun is then receiving its sustenance and passing it on to the nations. Passing it on to what Yeshua wanted to do at that moment was to plug that energy flow. How is he going to plug the energy flow? By stopping the sun in the orbit, he's going to stop the song. And when he stops the song, that means the sun is no more flowing its cosmic flow, its energy, its divine flow to the nations. He's basically shutting off the source of energy. And thereby enormously weakening them. Once he weakened them, in other words, Joshua realized that these guys were super powerful. It wasn't just physical power. They had enormous spiritual strength. They were plugged into really high powers. And Yeshua had to shut the line down. He had to shut down the electricity. So to shut the electricity, he had to shut the song. So therefore, he shut the singing. And when they're not singing, then it's not receiving from above and it's not passing on energy below. That's the idea of what happened over here. By the way, just the Rebbe in this talk goes ahead and explains just so beautifully. Why, the Rebbe asks, why is the sun racing through the sky at such enormous speed? Why is it moving? He says, if you say it's just a natural phenomenon, it's a natural phenomenon. But if we know, as the truth is, that it's the sun's soul that is moving, why does it have to move such crazy speed? Like, what's the rush? I say, God. He asks, and deeper than that, it says, and angels are the ones that are leading the sun on a higher understanding. It's the angel. There are angels that are leading that are the source of the soul of the sun on a higher level. So what's the madness? What's the rush? So the Rebbe gives just such a beautiful, he says, imagine, he says, from all the trillions of angels, you are the angel that was given the task to pull the sun, to be the one running and pulling the sun through the orbit. So when the angel sinks into how unbelievably fortunate it is that God, the sun is so important for earth, for the whole plan of creation. Out of all angels in the world, you are the one who are lucky enough and fortunate. You hit the jackpot, you hit the lottery. You're the angel who is leading the sun. That creates such excitement. The Rebbe says angels in general are very excitable beings. I like the way he says that. He says angels are very excitable beings. So imagine when the angel has something like this to get exciting. His energy is in such, he's basically, as I mentioned earlier, the angel is on steroids. And that's why the angel is because of that fire, that's what's causing the excitement and the movement at enormous, enormous speed. Stopping the angel to sing, and that's what the angel is doing. He's singing to God on his good fortune. Stopping the angel from singing is stopping the flow of energy. Okay? What happened as a result of that? What happened as a result of that? What happened is like this. The very, very same, the sun and the constellations That right, again, Joshua is now, I'm adding words, but this is the way it seems like the Rebbe is saying, okay? He's saying the sun, the constellations, that at this point are at a disadvantage for the Jewish people. Because if they're not at a disadvantage for the Jewish people, then Yeshua can let them continue. Right now, the energy flow is flowing to the nations. In order for the war to be won, Yeshua has to stop that energy, which means he has to turn the cosmic forces around from assisting the other side and turn around to assist Israel. By doing what? By silencing them. Wait. Oh, one more point. How did Yeshua get to silence the sun? What did he do? So there's a midrash, the Rebbe brings a midrash from the Tzemach Tzedek. The Tzemach Tzedek brings a midrash that the sun says to Joshua, what do you mean I should be silent? If I'm silent, who's going to sing? You want to shut down God's praises? What do you mean? Who do you think you are? And Joshua said, you know what? I'm going to sing. You be quiet, I'm singing. And the sun had to obey. The Tzemach Tzedek asks, why does the sun have to be silent? You want to sing? You can sing as well. Why do I have to be silent because you're singing? So the explanation is that the song of souls are much higher than the song of angels. The song of the sun is related to the song of angels, right? The song of the soul is much, much higher than the song of angels. So when the soul is singing, the angels have to be quiet. Similar to when the Jewish people say Shira, when the Jewish people say song every day, when we say Shema Yisrael, it says the angels quiet down. They're singing in heaven all the time. When we sing down here, they're silent. There's verses in Ezekiel where it describes how the angels are flapping their wings in their song. And then it says these words, Ba'amdam, when they stand still, Trafeno kanfeim, their wings go down. So the question is, why are they still? What's making them stand quietly? They run out of batteries, they need a recharge. They're angels. They get out of breath. So the deeper meaning is, the Rebbe brings this teaching, that the word ba'amdam comes from the word ba'amdam. 3 words. When a nation comes, they're silent. Ba'am, am is the Jewish people. When the Jewish people come before God, dam, it causes celestial beings to be silent. Doim, silent. So the Rebbe is saying that when the angels were silenced through Yeshua, it came about through Yeshua revealing a higher song that they sing. Oh, by the way, I know I'm going long, and I can still go for quite a while, so I don't want to keep you. Yeah, I'm talking. Yeah, I know. I don't want you to stay just because I'm going long. It's I'm just like deeply in the middle of this, but I just want to make sure don't be compelled to stay because she'll be fine. Yeah. Don't feel. I was feeling bad. I was thinking it's getting late. I started late and it's getting late. And as I told you, this class is still frazzled by me. I'm putting it together. This is not the class. This is the class prep. All right. So again, so on a deeper level, let's understand what's happening over here. What's happening is that when the soul starts singing, when Yeshua started singing, and basically the souls are singing, it's revealing a much higher level of divine energy than when the angels are singing. That part of their song is their subjugation. their subjugation draws down divine influence. But because the angels are of an inferior level than the souls, so the divine energy that they bring down is of an inferior quality. And therefore, they're able to sing while that energy is coming down, because singing means that you still have a certain presence. You're not shocked. When the souls start singing, they become electrocuted. And that's why they suddenly become silent. In other words, because the revelation that comes about through the song of the souls, which is deeper and higher than the angels, it causes the angels to freeze out of awe, and that's why they calm down. Okay? So that's the mechanics of the miracle. Yeshua silenced them by singing himself, and his song overpowered their song to silence them. By silencing them, their energy flow was cut off, and by the energy flow cut off, he was able to move the whole entire cosmic order that was at that time routing for the Gentiles was now turned around, not by divine intervention, but by a tzaddik, by the righteous individual down here who controls the world because of his service to God is so much higher than all other beings. As a result of that, he was able to turn around the entire system to his benefit. When did that happen? On Gimel Tamuz. So the Rebbe takes the exact same theme and he says, now let's take a look at my father-in-law in 1927. He's sitting in a Russian jail and they've got him. He has no weapon. He doesn't have a gun with him. Even though the previous Rebbe used to carry a pistol. It's really interesting. He was a gun owner. There were many people that wanted to take his life, and the Friedrich Rebbe would always carry a weapon. It's very interesting. It's a whole story about that. But not when he was in jail, of course. They kind of, he didn't have any weapon. He was on a very physical level. He was utterly defenseless. And they had all the power to, and they had already, as we spoke earlier, already decided to, God forbid, give him the ultimate punishment. So, there was no reason that didn't happen. And as mentioned earlier, it seems like there was, like the system was stacked against him. The entire exile, part of the exile is persecution. Sometimes persecution of righteous people and of big tzaddikim. And the previous Rebbe was in that dilemma. But because he sang a song, the Rebbe says, what's singing? He goes into a deeper meaning. Singing means love and fear. The two energies of song, racing forward and retracting. A song goes up and down. It's like because the previous Rebbe is spiritual, the service of tzaddikim and love and fear of God. And primarily the fact that he was teaching Torah, which is the highest song. And in Torah itself, he was spreading the secrets of Torah, the well springs of Torah, the well springs of Chassidus. That song is so much higher that it silenced the cosmic order. Same like on Gimel Tamuz. Same exact thing that happened 3,000 years earlier. And it made that the very forces that were against him in the days of Joshua, it was the sun and the orbit and all these things which were routing for the other side, were then turned around to stop, and therefore that stopping caused a victory for the side of holiness and for the side of the Jewish people. The Rebbe says an amazing thing happened. These very same people who jailed him, the very same people who arrested him, these very same people, they were the ones who first of all commuted his death sentence. Then they commuted his labor camp sentence. Then they had to release him. They sent him to exile, and a week later they commuted that as well. Who did it? The very same. In other words, what's going on over here is, and how? How? Not through arguing with them, not through a lawyer. It wasn't in a court of law, which means there was no argument over here. It was through a force that dictated to them and forced them to do it. Similar exactly how Yoshua is not arguing. He's telling the sun silence. He's overpowering it with his holiness. And he turns the whole thing around. So the Rebbe therefore says, Gimel Tamuz. The sun, the stop of the Gimel Tamuz 1927. The previous Rebbe is revealing his song, the song of spreading Torah across the teaching Torah and spreading Torah, which is the highest and deepest song, is overpowering the natural forces, and even the very forces that were against him were now flipped over. And again, no one proved it. It was because they were compelled to do so. So here you see the Rebbe says not only is it similar, it's the exact same miracle. If you look deeper, this is what the Rebbe says. Now my dear friend over here in this little pamphlet goes and takes the same story and he applies it to Gimel Tamuz 1994. And what's his thesis? Okay, this is a thesis. When I quote something the Rebbe says, then I hope to say it with certainty. This is a thesis, that's an idea, it's possible, but it's interesting. And he says like this. Okay, but I don't want to botch this up. I really don't want to botch this up because it's a little deep and complicated. But let me try to. One of the questions that we have over here is, hold it. We're saying that Yeshua stops the sun. If Yeshua stops the sun, then the flow of energy from the sun that's coming to the world stops. So if it stops, why is it only impacting the Gentile? Why isn't it impacting the Jewish people? We're not receiving our sustenance through the sun. We're living in the natural world. What do you think? We don't eat fruits and vegetables that grow from the sun? It would seem like he shuts their channel. We're talking about nature. Is nature not the channel of the Jewish people as well? You'll say, no, the Jewish people are miraculous people. That's true on some level, but on another level, there's nature. There's a natural world. The answer is as follows. As mentioned earlier, the sun has a body and the sun has a soul. The nations in the world that were idolaters, I'm talking about idolatry. The nations in the world that were idolaters saw the body and didn't see much the soul. The body of the soul, which is its natural existence, its physical presence in the sky, and its movement across the sky, which you can explain scientifically. What's causing it all that to happen? See things for its physicality. In other words, I'm sorry. As I mentioned to you earlier, I didn't bake this well yet. So he has an interesting thought over here. The soul of the sun, which is the singing of the sun, which is its surrender to God, because it's enclosed in the movement in the physical orb of the sun, and the physical movement of the sun creates a certain illusion of the natural order standing on its own. And that's the sustenance to the nations, a sustenance where God is camouflaged and concealed. So when you stop the sun from singing, which in turn stops the physical camouflage, the sun's, physical power in the sky, then you've kind of cut off this energy, this source of livelihood, this source of life. Now, when the sun is silenced, does that mean that there's no more energy flow? If there's no more energy flow, then as we spoke earlier, what's with the Jewish people? What's with holiness? How is holiness sustained if there's no flow? The answer is, again, that the flow of energy at that time comes from a much higher place. What do you mean it comes from a higher place? It comes from a silent sun, not from a noisy sun. Which means that the soul of the sun has become so canceled to God that it can't even sing. When the soul of the sun becomes so canceled to God that it can't even sing, its body is no more concealing on it. The body is silent, which means there's no more natural block. There's no more phenomenon of nature to conceal. And that's, you see, when the soul can sing, even though it's singing to God, there is still a presence of self there. The sun is in a state that it can sing to God. It's not muted out of overwhelmed revelation. It still has a presence. Therefore, its natural and its encasement can block even more. See what I'm saying? When the soul is singing, that too is already a concealment. Why? The fact that it can sing, it's not silenced by awe. It is singing means that it has a self. It's a self that's surrendering, but it's still a self. Therefore, its external side, which is the physical encasement of it, which is the sun that we see, that's the sun that we see, not the soul of it, can act as a complete block. And that's where the idolater nations were receiving from, because they need to receive from a place where where God created a concealment where they can continue being idolaters, so that there can be free choice. In order there should be free choice, there has to be concealment. And so that's the operation, the way God runs things, where he allows the world to block on his truth. What Yeshua is really doing is, he's upgrading creation a whole bunch of notches. He's taking the stars, the constellations, and bringing them to a state where they can't sing because they're muted, the soul of the sun. What that is doing is that it blows the cover. Then the physical element of the soul, which is really just an expression of its soul, can't block anymore. Because the soul of the sun is so nullified to God, nothing can block. Then there's divine revelation. It's divine revelation, that's holiness. Because holiness is acknowledgement to God and surrender to God. That's where the Jewish people come in. So the idolater nations, their power is, they thrive in concealment. They don't thrive in revelation. They need a singing sun, which creates a natural set of rules, which create a consistent flow of nature, which obscures and hides the truth. The Jewish people need a silent sun. Means the energy of the Jewish people is in a silent sun. Surrender, recognition of the Hashem, not being concealed by the natural concealments. So once we understand that phenomenon, now let's take a look and see what happens Gimel Tamuz. So he draws the parallel and he says like this. The tzaddik is compared to the sun. Because the tzaddik brings all, just like the sun is light, the tzaddik, in this case of the Rebbe, he's the sun of the world. What made the world light and bright after the Holocaust? Think about it. It was a long night of the Holocaust, and then came dawn. Who made the world bright? The Rebbe made the world bright. His warmth reached the four corners of the globe. He embraced every Jew. He hugged every Jew, elevated every Jew. Light gave such illumination and such warmth. Powerful sun. There is sustenance now, but what do we see of it? What do we see of the sun? So there is the Rebbe's neshama, which is on levels, the soul of the sun, that is attached to God on the highest levels. And then there is the visible physical body that we can see. And sometimes, because there's a physical body, we ourselves mitigate the power of the tzaddik. We think that, okay, he's a human being like everybody else. Moves there, goes here, comes there, has physical hands, you can see, you can touch, you can. Just like the physical body of the sun conceals. Now depends. We ourselves are divided. This is his thesis. Again, I'm just telling you his thesis. He says we ourselves as Hasidim and as Jews and as followers of the Rebbe have within us the idolatrous side, the Gentile inside of us, and the Jew inside of us. What does that mean? Our inner soul that is divine, that doesn't get obscured, when it looks at the Rebbe, when it looks at the tzaddik, when it looks at the sun, disregards the externalities and knows that we're dealing with a channel of pure divinity in the world that has no boundaries. It's a divine channel. It's a power. We know that our forefathers were divine channels. Of course, they're humans, but their body is completely surrendered to their soul, and their soul is completely surrendered to God. They're one. However, sometimes the Gentile inside of us, the part of us that sees, that looks at things with coarseness, our animal soul, our external self, that is external and sees the superficiality of everything, can limit the tzaddik based on his physical think that there's limitations based on that physical body. That's what we mean. And from the Gentile inside of us comes sustenance sometimes to the unholy in the world from the tzaddik as well. Because if the tzaddik is the flow of energy to the world, it has to go to everybody. And there can be leaking chas v'sholem even to the pure klipa. That's when the klipa inside of us, the unholy of it, limits based on the physical. What's the miracle of Gimel Tamuz? What happened on that day? What Joshua did was he took down he removed the physicality of the sun by making the sun stop its movement. What happened to the soul of the sun? What did we say earlier? The soul of the sun was silent because it reached a much higher level of connection. Instead of singing, what it usually does, the soul, which is singing, which is making its noise, it stops singing, and in what state did it go into? Into a state of silence. What did that do? That makes the nations fall apart. What does that mean? When Gimel Tamuz comes along, and physically the Rebbe is no more kind of operating in that physical vessel. The Gentile inside of us has two options. It's stuck. It's in a dilemma. The superficial external part in our being that looks at things superficially either comes to a conclusion that the Rebbe passed away, meaning the energy is gone, it's over. It was nice to have him here. He did a lot of good in the world. He was a great tzaddik and fine. And fartik, it's over. The sun is no more in the sky. It's not here. Because if you're looking physical, or even the more preferable way is not that the Gentile gives up, the Gentile converts. The Gentile inside of us suddenly has an enlightenment because he realizes what? The very same Rebbe that was till now functioning in a body, that I looked at as a body, am now realizing he's much more than a body. How do you see? Millions of people in the world are communicating with him and getting answers, even though he's not the, and he's answering through his books, through dreams, through videos. How many people go to have questions and suddenly they have a question there and then they get an answer by watching a Rebbe's video and they have amazing, and we're not talking about one, we're talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of stories. Some of them that are just absolutely, I have myself crazy stories, but when you really see that he's answering, which means what you once saw as a limited being inside a body is not as limited in that body at all. Not that the body isn't there. I'm not getting into the body now. The body is not a concealment anymore. Once that's what Yeshua did. The body stopped in the sense that the body of the sun is no more blocking the soul of the sun. What does it mean? It means that we have to stop looking. We have to stop looking with the coarseness of a vision. We needed to get a deeper vision. To look at the soul. Now, how is the physical body, when the physical body was in operation? It's through the song that the soul is singing. What's the song the soul is singing? All the talks and all the memorim and all the sichos, the 40 years where the Rebbe is speaking to the world. And his Farbrengens were carried on national television, not national, on not a national, what do they call it? On what's it called? On cable. Across. I mean, the Rebbe is a voice to the whole world, speaking, and everybody. That's the song that's being sung, teaching. It's in a sense on Gimel Tamuz, silence. We don't hear any more talks. We don't hear anymore. But just like when Yeshua silenced the sun, what happened to the sun? The soul of the sun accelerated to a much higher place by being nullified to a higher level of nullification, a higher level of connection. And from the higher place, it's channeling life to the world. But when it's channeling from the higher place, it only goes to holiness. It doesn't go to the unholy because you don't have the external concealment to block it. So what's happening on again, we're dealing over here. I know we're dealing with we're guessing over here on things that are utterly godly, but the Torah does want us to use our minds. And whatever I'm saying now is just in a manner of speculation. But some of this makes sense, at least to me. It means that from Gimel Tamuz and onward, the Rebbe's influence to the world is coming from a higher place. The withdrawal itself is helping cut off the life force to the external and forcing the life force into holiness. But let's take this to the final step. The soul going up a higher level to a state of silence. With this I'm concluding. The soul going up to a higher level, the sun, which you remember, the tzaddik is compared to the sun. Moshe's face was the face of the sun. And the Rebbe would always refer to himself, not to himself, his father-in-law, and to all the Chabad Rebbeim as the Moshe of the generation. So on Gimel Tamuz, the sun stopped in the sky. What does that mean? The body was disregarded. Was this the body of the sun, which means the concealments that come from the body, whatever concealments are, were removed. So that the soul of the sun is revealed, a much deeper element of soul. And the soul itself is going to a higher place. To which place? To a place that causes silence. What causes silence? So in Kabbalah it says, in Hasidus it says, that when there's the revelation of Keter, the crown, which is messianic light, it causes silence. That the revelation of Keser, of Siyag LaChachma Shtika, the wall around Chachma is silence. What does that mean? Chachma is the highest sphere of revelation. What's beyond Chachma? Keter, the crown. What happens when you touch beyond Chachma, you're going up into the crown? Shtika, silence. What's Mashiach? The revelation of the crown. So Gimel Tamuz, according to this thesis, is a time that the Rebbe's neshama is being elevated, and it fits very well with what I showed you earlier with the Or HaChama. Mashiach is taken into Gan Eden for some kind of prep with his body and his soul, and he's going over there for some spiritual prepping. Part of that spiritual prepping is actually literally the miracle of the Gimel. To us, it's painful and it's dark, no question. There is a silencing of the Rebbe's voice in the world, but that silence doesn't mean less influence. It means more influence, but from a much deeper and higher place. In a place that it's only coming, that cuts off, and it serves a purpose. One purpose it serves is to cut off the klippas. Now you realize, the one who's going to end the whole exile has a serious business of cutting klippa off because they've been in power for 5,000 years. So to unplug this plug is not such a simple situation. Yeshua just did it temporarily. Mashiach is going to have to do it permanently. So this silencing, so to speak, of Mashiach's soul, going into a higher state of silence, serves a cosmic purpose. And the cause, just like the Rebbe says, what caused the Malachim, the angel of the sun, to be quiet? A higher song that was revealed to it. So what is that? Over here, the comparison is a much higher revelation of godliness that you can't sing to, you can only melt to and silence to. But all of this, then this departure or this concealment is exactly going back to the previous Rebbe. The same like the sun. It's like by the previous Rebbe, it's a step to exile to redemption. But later it's revealed that it never was a step to exile, it was always a step to redemption. So this period of time, it's 29 years now, is a period of time which is definitely a step to redemption. If it's the explanation that I gave you today, if this is correct, is good. If it's another explanation, it's another explanation. I don't know. But what I do know, what the Rebbe said explicitly, is Gimel Tamuz has one definition until retroactively it's turned over, and then we realize that it never was what we thought it was. It's completely different. And what does he say we thought it was? We thought it was an exile, and what is it really? It's really a redemption. So as the day of Gimel Tamuz comes, let's hope this year we don't have to even have the first interpretation and then have to undo the first interpretation and come to the higher interpretation. But we should have already the sun re-emerging in its body, and now no one will think that the body anymore is a limitation. That's the point. It's not, the point is not to discard the body. The point is to that we refocus and expand our understanding of what Rebbe is, so that when he comes down in a body, we're not looking at the physical body, we're seeing so much more. The body helps us see him, but it's not the body over here is just is no more. We don't look at it as just another human being with great powers. We realize it's so much higher. So there is a concealment, and that I can say with certainty, that Gimel Tamuz is the day. It's a vid day, and it's going to be the greatest day in history. Right now, we're till now, at least till right this moment, there's still a cloud that we got, a fog hovering over it. But I think it's important that we get rid of the intolerance. I can't, let people live. People that see it as yard site, that's the way they connect. People that like, that want, that's fine. And there definitely is levels of that. And those who see it as the coming of Mashiach, that's fine too. The whole, it's my way or your way. From the way I'm seeing it, it's everything. There's so many levels to this. And the question is, where do you want to plug in? The more we learn, we can plug in on higher levels. The main thing is that we feel unified. Okay, so there's this way of looking at it, that way of looking at it. And it's probably way more complex than what I'm saying. But it's just an interesting glimmer and glimpse into all of it, which I found fascinating. And that was the name of this booklet. I don't know if I'm going to, is Mashiach and Geula Gimel Tamuz, the sun stands still, then and now. So there is a website called Mashiach in Depth, WordPress.com. The truth is, let me tilt my hat to him, because I think he did a pretty good job, although maybe I questioned some of the things over here, but I really thought it was good. His name is Rabbi Yaakov Bach. He's on my, how did I know him? Because when I send my Mashiach videos, he's one of the recipients, and he used to give me a lot of feedback back and forth a lot of times, and really cool things back and forth between me and him. I did communicate with him sometimes. I didn't communicate about this. I would like to pick his brain on some of these ideas. He lives in Israel, good man, and that's the thing. I hope I didn't do a disservice to his piece, but I think it's good. Anyways, the main thing is Mashiach should be revealed already. We shouldn't have to go through all this. To see the Geula today. Okay. I think I'm voting to leave it on YouTube for now.